we've got a team member who's been a solid performer and is a good values fit for the organization. And they've got a personal situation, a health issue with someone that for whom they're the primary caregiver, which can be very taxing mentally on a human being, and it's affecting this person's performance. So what do we do? I think first is we have to just ask ourselves, like, what's going to be more valuable and the best solution for the team? Is it from just a totally practical standpoint? We're gonna put being a kind human aside for a second. We'll come back to that. But just from a totally practical standpoint, if we ask what's going to be more cost effective and productive for the team in the long term, is it going to be to push this person aside because they're not performing for a while, maybe replace them, or is it to say, how can we work with this person, understanding that they're not going to be as productive as they used to be, and give them some time to be able to come back to their typical levels of performance? I would argue that just from a purely practical perspective, it is more cost effective and better for the performance of the team over the long term to do option B, which is to say, hey, we understand that this person is not going to be as productive as they were for some time. And the trick is, like, where the calculation can become a little more complicated, particularly in your case, is for how long, is this going to be, which we'll come back to that too. So if I forget, please remind me. But the idea is, when there's a couple of things that happen when we discard a human being for purely what we perceive as practical business purposes. One is that it's actually, I'm guessing you're going to be the hiring manager. So if you have to replace this person, how much of your time is it going to take to find a new person, get them up to speed? What is the likelihood that they're going to be as good a performer as this person was and as good of a values fit? I don't care how good your interview process is. That's very hard. You're basically rolling the dice. You usually don't know that for sure until you get somebody on the job for 60 days or so, maybe 90 days, before you really know, are they a great values fit? Are they going to be a top performer? You can have good indications, but you don't know for sure. So you might hire somebody, spend 60 days investing in this person, find out they're not the right fit, have to do it again. That takes a lot of time. And I don't know, how complicated the sales process is in your organization, but I know, generally speaking, for salespeople, you're not really breaking even on a salesperson for 6 months because you're investing a lot of time in training them. They're not that effective when they first start. It takes a while for them to kind of break even, but it's a worthwhile investment. So then the other thing to think about is the impact on the rest of the team. If we discard a person for what seems to be purely practical business purposes, what message does that send to the rest of the team? Are we truly cared for? Are we valuable members of a team, or are we just kind of commodities that are easily replaceable? So my suggestion would be, to the extent that it's possible, sometimes this can be really hard. And, if it's a long ongoing situation, we might have to come back to that. But if it's possible to try to work with this person, knowing that in the short term, there's going to be a hit on performance. And unfortunately, I don't think there's much you can do about that. You can try to motivate the person in different ways. I don't think it's going to help that much, actually, because there's a natural part of being human that if we have something very serious going on in our personal lives, that by nature is going to affect how we show up at work. And if a large part of our capacity is devoted to processing information that's affecting us outside of work, that is a portion of the brain that's not being used, for work. So now, that being said, I think there are some things that you could do to help in that area. I just want to set the expectation that there's no magic bullet here where you're going to just help somebody go from being somewhat distracted, somewhat of performing at a lower level than they have been. But there are some things you can do to help. And I would suggest trying not to motivate the person. But at first, I think it's really important just to give the person time to talk through what's going on. And here's why I suggest that. So like, for instance, if you have a 20-minute one-to-one, there could be an impulse, a natural inclination to say, well, I'm going to spend 15 minutes of the one-to-one trying to motivate this person to perform well because that's what's needed for the job. The issue with that is that it's probably not going to do much because the person isn't ready for that. So if somebody's really processing something and they're distracted, what they first need is to process that. And once they have, then it's a little bit easier. It's almost as though, imagine a portion of your brain, let's just to make the math really simple, let's say a quarter of your brain is kind of processing something that's outside of work. You're not getting that quarter of that brain back until that issue has been processed. And that's actually something that you can help with as a leader. And it's just by really asking questions and listening and practicing a skill that's called reflective listening. So, you ask the person how they're feeling, and they say, well, I'm feeling, anxious about my sick relative, the person and I spend a lot of time caring for this person. And you just simply reflect back. So it sounds like you're worried and anxious because this is happening, and you don't know what's going to happen. And then the person's either going to say, yes, that you've got it, you nailed it, or they're going to come back and say, no, that's not exactly it. And they're going to process through this by you asking questions. And eventually, if you ask enough questions and just to set expectations, I mean, this might take 15, 20 minutes. This might take an entire one-to-one. They're going to get to the point where they say, yeah, that's it. That's what I'm feeling. You've got it. And you'll sense when they say that, you will see like this relaxation, and you may not get that full 25% of the brain back, but maybe you get 20 or 15 even. And now, without you having to motivate or anything, just by allowing that person the chance to process what's going on, and they can essentially leave it and now focus on work, you've given them the opportunity to perform much better. And it might take, for a couple one-to-ones, especially if you're meeting with this person every week. I mean, you might even want to, if you have the time, to have a few check-ins in a week, or maybe even daily check-ins just for 5 or 10 minutes to kind of start the day and let these things process. Because if you can help this person to process these things, again, it's like that 25% of the brain that's not at work, you're reducing that percentage down to maybe 5 or 10% that's not at work. And there's a couple benefits here. One is that the person's going to feel very cared for by you. They're going to feel like, wow, I haven't felt this type of care from a manager maybe ever. You're going to enjoy it. You're not going to at first, probably, because my guess is if you're in a sales organization, you're driven by numbers. How many calls are we making? What's our closing percentage? All those things, which is fine. So there's this tendency to say, no, I've got to be producing. But we're dealing with human beings here, and human beings don't produce when they're occupied with stuff that's taking them away from their work. So at first, there's going to be a lot of resistance in your body. Like, you're not going to want to do this. You may not enjoy it. But once you've done it a couple of times, I think you're really going to enjoy the effect of this deepening relationship that you have with this team member. And again, this is not a miracle cure. I'm expecting him to go back to his perfect, performance that you saw before. But the hope is, if you experiment with this, and you're welcome to play with it and come back next week and let me know how it's going. And, we can talk through iterations on what's happening. But if you can do this for some time, I feel very confident you are going to see improvement without trying to fix the person or improve the person, just giving them a chance to talk and feel heard and process this stuff. The reason I say that is because if he or she has been a top performer in the past, they're wired for excellence. They're wired for achievement. We're actually all wired for achievement. I mean, it's one of the core drives of humans. We want to achieve. It's just that a lot of us have bad habits that get in the way. It sounds like he has good habits. He is an achiever. He is an A player, or she, I think you said it was a he. But in this case, he's taken a short-term hit because of an emotionally charged situation that's occupying his mind. And so as much as you might not like, to think of yourself in this way in the short term, you can be a therapist to some degree. And that, the notion of being a good therapist isn't you got to fix the person, come up with some diagnosis and tell them how they're going to get better. A good therapist just listens and helps somebody feel heard. And that processing is what allows them to move through what they're going through. Now, one caveat here, this can be a little bit more challenging if this is going to be a long, drawn out process. And then you really have to do that calculation that we mentioned at the beginning. Is it worth it? Maybe this person even needs, can we get them on, unpaid time off, or some mix of paid time off and a unpaid time off, where they can just have the time to do this, to be with to take care of this person that they're in charge of taking care of.